Today is a great day to have this conversation. Just yesterday, the Indian cabinet announced and approved its National Critical Mineral Mission, announced 45 blocks across India where it's going to mine lithium, nickel, cobalt, a bunch of other rare earths. And Philip's book, Under the Metal Sky, is how minerals shaped human imagination, culture, emotion, and what's very special about it and beautiful about it is it has a certain ground-uppedness, the sense that he has walked under the earth in every chapter, put us into a certain claustrophobic wonder, spoken with miners as much as other people like scientists, and he has wandered across a very large geography in terms of nations as well as different kinds of places. And I thought, Philip, you could start with maybe what are some of the places you went to and the questions you had and what did they do to you? Yeah.
Is this working? Check. Check. So I live in Cornwall, which is a small bit of the southwest of Britain, right down near the ocean, and it's very famous for its minerals and metals particularly. I've lived there about 30 years, and only now have I in the last few years, come to explore that aspect of it. And it sort of took shape, in an organic sense, like a lot of stories, a lot of books, a lot of passions and enthusiasms. It took on its own momentum and its own shape. So I'm very loosely, from Cornwall, I went into Europe, up the Rhine, into the Central Europe, the Erzgebirge, the ore-bearing mountains of southern Germany and the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and out to the Caucasus. That's the kind of geographical spread of it. And as Yuvan said, it's in each of these places I was sort of seeing what I found, really. Seeing what stories mines and minerals and metals threw up, both historically and in a contemporary sense. But it begins in Cornwall, and Yuvan was talking about the sort of ground-upwardness of it. And the first stage of it, I met some slightly wild and crazy mine explorers. So underneath Cornwall now, you have, from 200, 300 years ago, you have a huge network, a huge labyrinth of mines. There's no mining at all now in Cornwall. Some is just about to start again, but all these mines, the copper, it produced half the world's copper in the 19th century, tin for bronze for thousands of years. And yet all these mines are abandoned. So there's a bunch of people who I came across who spend their weekends and spare time exploring these underground spaces. And I fell in with them, and they invited me on several trips. We went down. And which was kind of fascinating and kind of, it was very fitting for the book because it was slightly on the edge. It revealed both these extraordinary, wondrous places and also the sort of horror of it. The stark reality of mining and what metals did. And if you bear with me for a moment, I've got a little reading from the start of the book. Which sets us right into the underground, several hundred feet down an old tin and copper mine. Abandoned so freshly. These places were abandoned overnight. The price would just drop in the middle of the 19th century, and the engines would stop. The miners just one day just wouldn't go down anymore. And there were places in this mine and others where, in the mud, you could see the boot steps with their hobnails in the bottom. You could see the boot steps still in the mud, as well as tools scattered around after 150 years. But I'll just put my glasses on. But this is a short section about one of these places underground. Suddenly, we were among stalactites. They started as thin finger-like bars pushing down from the ceiling. They were brown and glistening. The acidic water was full of iron hydroxides and left a tiny deposit as it dripped. On the floor were corresponding studs, upturned bulbs of burnt brown. We stepped more carefully, crouching to avoid knocking them off with our helmets. Then there were more. These ones were larger, thick as a thigh at the top, or extending to stout formations which reached from ceiling to floor, and we had to slalom to avoid them. They were smooth to the touch, rippled and rounded by constant wet. But what was striking about these things was not just the size of them, nor their sculpted form, nor the number of them, but their speed. Calcium carbonate stalactites in limestone caves grow at about 0.13 of a millimetre per year. The largest, in show caves, with their organ pipe formations, need tens of thousands of years to take shape. These ones, these post-mining shapes, had formed in less than 2 centuries. Elsewhere in the mine, we had seen extraordinary blue copper growths. They came in multiple shades of blue: light powder blue, deep bottle blue, international Klein blue, marine blue, celestial blue. It tumbled down the rock in a shiny blue cascade of little wave-like ridges, and from the ceiling it hung in blue stalactites and curtains of blue, which draped the rock, falling and folding in cloth-like undulations of blue. And all of it, all of this coppery blue, was recent. Just as the miners themselves had dug out these imitation cave systems in super quick time, so the copper and iron had decorated it with rapid speleotherms. Perhaps that's the real superpower of metals, the hidden accelerator in their chemistry, revealed to those who first shaped them, who learned to smelt them, to forge ploughs and spears. Slow labours were made quick. The saunter of time became a trot, then a gallop. Metals offer a fast route to change, the sort of change that is normally undetectable: rivers forming valleys, mountains growing, or species evolving. It wasn't tin or copper that was being sought here, nor the money it might bring. It was the power of immediate transformation. And since the last lime miner left, when easier and cheaper sources were found in South America or Australia, the unextracted metals have continued their time-lapse progress unseen, staining the walls with their improbable blue, or transforming the empty tunnels into colonnades of oxidized iron.
I just got to know that while writing the book, Philip would spend up till midnight under the mines and come back caked in mud, and his partner wouldn't be able to recognize who's at the door. In the book, there is a very close melding of mind and mineral, and how metal accelerated different human things, especially emotion. And in the first chapter is about ochre, the red substance, and how that, for the first time, allowed humans to express and elongate a certain kind of imagination. And elsewhere in gold and silver, greed. And can you talk about that a little bit, human emotion, imagination? And
Yes, of course. So, I mean, the story as I took it began with over. Each chapter has a sort of metal or a mineral as its title and its sort of theme. It goes in various different directions. And the first one was ochre, because it was the first mineral that was used. Ochre, prepared ochre, has been found with 285,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens. Neanderthals used it. And then in South Africa, there's a cave in which they found prepared ochre from 80,000 years ago. And it was being made into a crayon, and on the rock they'd found little scratches, little abstract shapes, and it's thought by the archaeologists who were celebrating their own work in that sense that this was the first evidence of abstract expression, of emotional expression, of some sort of preparation of the earth in order to be able to express the imagination. And this is a theme which I explored sort of throughout the book, and the stories that I found sort of illustrated it in different ways. And early on in my research, I came across the Romanian ethnographer Mircea Eliade, who wrote a wonderful book called The Forge and the Crucible about metallurgy in early society. And there was an arresting sentence in that, in which he said that the discovery of metals opened the imagination. And that was for me, that was a sort of eureka moment. And I thought, wow, yes, that miracle, if one could think about it, of heating by chance or by design, heating a bit of rock, a bit of ore, dull rock, and then seeing, as the heat develops, seeing this liquid coming out of it, magically coming out of it. And that moment was repeated endlessly through different societies, different continents, changed our species, I think, forever. I mean, the way we look at the world, what the world can provide us with, that really the Earth is a sort of secret cache of wonders and materials and magic powers. And that was the theme that one can see going throughout the history of man's relationship with minerals, right through from ochre, right the way through to our use of lithium and rare earths today to put in our mobile phones. It's the same thing. But I think that what motivated me most of all was that moment of wonder. I was a child one of those children who had their eyes to the ground the whole time, picking things up, and I was always sort of collecting crystals and fossils and all sorts of different things. And people would give me, they thought I was interested in geology, and would give me books of geology for Christmas, and which are illustrated beautifully with these color illustrations of rocks and things. And then these kind of extraordinarily complicated diagrams of geology, and which was completely lost of me, because it was always, for me, the way things looked. I was just a sort of, I was looking at the bling of the earth, if you like, and attracted by that. And then when I was about 8, I discovered, again, by chance, I discovered a giant ammonite, something like 2 or 3 feet across in a rock. I had a geological hammer, and I just whacked away at any rock I could see, and this bit of blue lias just broke open, and in it was this ammonite, and which was a wonderful thing. And I sort of forgot. I went through my teens and sort of forgot about everything, and sort of was a sleepwalker in one sense. And then, on a sort of personal note, at about the age of 18, I sort of came out of that and rediscovered the world, and rediscovered my own sort of enthusiasm as a rock hunter, as a child. And in a sense, that's where this story begins, is the sense that as individuals we can have of the wonder of the world, and particularly in rocks, and to explore what that's done. And of course, there's a flip side to it. There's the idea that what we've pulled from the earth has given us too much power. It's provided us with wonder, but what we also take out from the earth is hubris. And we live in the shadow of what these powers have enabled us to do, and the damage, indirect damage that they've caused. So this, I felt, is very much the theme of our age, in one sense, that we need to understand the damage we've done, but we need to also understand the wonders where it began, and the respect for what it can provide, if that doesn't sound too pious.
So the book is actually structured by different minerals. It begins with your childhood, and then there's ochre, and then gold, silver, lithium, and there's a range of minerals. And one common thread I found was a clash of worldviews. An Indian example I can think of is the Niyamgiri Hills in Odisha, where a mining giant wanted to extract bauxite. They saw only bauxite, but the people, the Dongriya Kondh, saw Niyam Raja. So that hill is our king, and he rules us. And this is something you explore. The certain kinds of people saw gold and attached sacrality to it, while in other cultures it became war, it became bloodshed. You can speak about that.
Yeah, that's the sort of the two themes. There's interesting about the sacred nature of the metals in South America before the Spanish. there was gold particularly, and silver as well. And there was a garden entirely made of silver and gold, of animals and trees, and there was a whole sort of nature park, if you like, created out of gold and silver. And when the Spanish came, they took all the gold and silver and melted it down and took it back to Europe. And that sort of, that sense of actually, and it's interesting to think of it in the sense of people from the outside and the local. And of course, we all have a respect and a regard for the local around us. But to come in and see resources is a whole different dimension, and that's one of the things I wanted to draw attention to. There's an interesting thread in antiquity in Greek literature where mining was on a very small scale. There was mining, there was gold and silver that was used, but there was a thread in Greek writers that recognizing that this was wrong. I mean, Ovid writes about how when we take the things from the earth, we bring forth evil, we bring forth envy, we bring forth war, and it was recognized in antiquity, the same idea. And I just think that you know we're so used to metals being, I mean, in this microphone being all around us, it's quite easy to forget the cost of what it is and what we're actually doing to the earth. You know, if we regard the earth in a sort of Gaia sense, that it should be sacred in some sense, or at least revered, then to take the resources does have a certain cost to it. And I just think that it's something. We're all re-examining our attitudes to the natural world. And minerals are not the first thing people think of. I mean, we think of animals and plants and these sort of things, but minerals are dead. They're the inanimate side of nature. But actually, when you look at it, they reveal so much more, and so much more the way we've treated the earth, and the way we've also been inspired and been expanded by wonder.
So we have about 7 minutes. I think we'll open out to questions.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I had marked this session months ago, as soon as your name and the session came up, that I need to be here, I need to take your book. I come from Ladakh, I stay in Ladakh, and I've spent time in the Himalaya and Ladakh a lot. And now Ladakh is a question for mining, excavation, extraction, all of it, all vested interests. Your book review doesn't say much about the Himalaya or the Ladakh that you've explored. I don't think so. So my question would be, when you're extracting minerals, it is a time in time when technology and the investment matches. And that's when you know that this land is ready or can be mined. Would you say as to which places were mined, and was there a particular time that it happened? A time in that moment of man's development?
I mean, that's interesting. Technology and mining have gone hand in hand in a beneficial sense. If one thinks of technological progress in Cornwall, mining, for instance, high-pressure steam, which gave us the train, which gave us all sorts of things, was invented in order to be able to rid the mines of water and therefore to go deeper. And I think that's a very interesting idea that technology and minerals and extraction go hand in hand and in parallel, if you like. And I think the history of technology has the same sort of theme, if you like, as minerals, in that it's enabled us to do amazing things and to survive in extraordinary ways. And yet there's a cost, you know. And I think it's this sort of overarching. I did think of it like a sort of Greek sort of tragedy or Greek myth, you know, the idea that we're drawn to something we enjoy it, and then comes the cost. You know, it's a sort of classic trajectory of Greek myth or any myth of warning. And I think, you know, to bring it to the present day, we live in an extraordinarily explosive moment of technology, and the cost is there. The cost is there in places like DRC and in India now with the announcement of this critical mineral campaign. In order to use our phones, we're ripping up the earth in sacred or you know, places which are damaged. So I think, yes, technology is a big part of the mining and the metal story. Thank you.
I'll ask you a question. Yeah. You walk a lot with miners, and I've read a few books about mineralogy, and it's about the science and the discovery and the atomic structures too much. And what, in terms of worldview, were you able to learn, which is different from that sort of a literature? Walking with these people who actually excavated, dug, suffered.
Yes, I mean, it's in the nature of mining, and a lot of miners are not. I mean, I can come in and sort of say how wonderful rocks are, but if you're a miner, it's a day-to-day work, it's day-to-day survival, it's money, and a lot of miners I talked to had that, but there was always an element of going underground. In Cornwall, I see it particularly because I know it best. There's a kind of reverence for the old mining traditions, and people I know who I talk to, mining stopped 20 years ago, so there are many miners still around, and I'd interview them, you know, and they were, I mean, the horrors of it and the conditions they worked in, and yet they missed it. It was I mean, a bit like a soldier missing war. You know, it has that horror, it has that intensity of life as well. But just was sort of slightly tangential to what you're saying. I mean, the book ends with gold, and right up in the mountains of Svaneti in Georgia in the Caucasus. And I spent some time with a man who'd spent his whole life panning for gold as a sort of hobbyist miner, if you like. And he'd made a little money out of it. It was a hobby, but he'd earned from it. And I felt that he distilled that sense. You know, he was in his 70s, and he loved the mountains, he loved the rivers that the panning came from, and he loved the work. And I think that balance is something that needs to be rediscovered, if you like. There was a line I came across recently in a wonderful book I read, that cities are like inverted mines, which is a wonderful image, and I slightly wish that I'd had that image and put it in my book, but unfortunately Yuvan, in his recent book, Intertidal, has that image, but it was one of those sentences that crystallized what I was thinking. Cities are like inverted mines. All that's around us came from the ground, and a lot of it from underground, and if we begin to sort of see the world in that sort of flipped way, look at the city around you, the concrete, and think that that's all come out of the earth, then one begins to get that sort of vertiginous sense of what we've done to the earth and how we must re-examine it, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So could we have some more time if there are any questions? Yeah.
Hi, yes, I was very excited to come and listen to you. So one of the things with extraction of minerals and such is that it seems to be intrinsically linked with exploitation of indigenous land, of the people who are brought into the land, and erasure of cultures. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I mean, it's a very interesting example with lithium, which is the metal of the moment, if you like. The key ingredient of batteries, all of what we do, cars, driving, will depend on batteries. Lithium, being an incredibly light element, has this capacity to store power at very light, low intensity. So everyone's after lithium, as we know. And the huge deposit is in this sort of triangle in South America, Chile and Peru and Bolivia, this area. And there's a huge high salt flats. I haven't been there. It wasn't part of my journey, but I've seen pictures. It's a very, very extraordinary landscape with the white of the ground and the blue of the sky. And in the white are the lithium brines. And of course, the local people who've lived there the whole time, they've got no use for lithium. And it's the breast milk of the mother goddess. And there's a huge battle going on between the local people and the extraction of it. And Noel lithium it's plastered all over it, and there have been court cases. And it has got a reasonable amount of publicity, but it should be more, because it is the same thing is going on in the United States with lithium and critical minerals and against the Native American territories. And again, as we're mentioning in India, the sacred landscapes being, by coincidence or some sort of geological resonance, that they're also the places where these minerals are found. And it's a clash that I think is going to characterize it. There's another element that I didn't go into at all, which is deep sea mining. Now, there's huge amounts of valuable minerals in nodules on the seabed, places which haven't been discovered, species that haven't even been identified, and yet there's a huge amount of technology being developed in order to be able to hoover up these things from the seabed. And again, a very welcome clash of a sense that no, we must also examine what's happening. So I think it's right up to the moment, this mixture of benefit and damage is there, and yes, exactly, with native peoples, local peoples, indigenous peoples, are the voice of all our conscience. We should listen.
Hi, Philip. My name's Scott MacDonald. Thank you very much for the talk. I was recently in Oman, and there's a rock in Oman that has a peculiar ability to absorb CO2. I think it exists around the whole world, but in Oman it's closer to the surface, so they can access it. And the problem with it is it absorbs CO2 over hundreds of years rather than immediately. And they figured out a process to go in and fracture the rock with water, and it absorbs CO2 much faster. I thought this was a remarkable development, new technology. I was just interested in your instinctive response to that. Does it sound like a good idea or not?
Well, to me, and I don't know that rock in Oman, I mean, to me, immediately, it says actually, I mean, it's very easy to fasten on the damage and the sort of the horrific conditions of mining and that aspect, and yet to forget that actually this is what can benefit us. I mean, the medicines, the technology that we have from minerals and the benefits that are brought are huge. And whatever one thinks about the correction of CO2 and geoengineering of that sort, I think there's an awful lot to be learnt and developed. And wouldn't it be great if the rocks could also help solve the very problem that we've made them create, if you like? And yes, and it is a very exciting moment. You know, technology in those sort of things. We're rediscovering minerals that were discarded from mines for hundreds of years are now being discovered in the spoil heaps as being useful. So I think there is a cycle, a responsible cycle that we can do. We can use the earth to our advantage without exploiting it. I mean, that's a kind of obvious point. But I think that there are particular examples where, yes, these things can be discovered. Isn't that a great story? Yeah.
Hi there. I wanted to ask, I think you write about alchemy in your book, which is sort of, the earliest form of science perhaps, and constantly being discredited, and yet it seems to survive and, be rediscovered endlessly. And so, I mean, is alchemy still relevant today, do you think?
during my research, it kept on recurring, alchemy, as a sort of, as a refrain, as a sort of like a melody coming back. And what's interesting about alchemy, many things, is that it's almost universal. The idea that metals and minerals gestate in the womb of the earth, that's the sort of principle behind it. And these processes are ongoing, in which, the same processes that make trees grow make the minerals develop from base metals into gold eventually. That's the process. And it's an idea that spans, it's found here in India and China, wherever metals are, some sort of form of alchemy is believed in. And for a long time, it was sort of overshadowed because it was a precursor to scientific inquiry, and because it was sort of bonkers in a way, and also avaricious. People with sort of quacks and charlatans would pretend that they could make gold. And then the Enlightenment came along, and the sort of responsible scientists sort of booted the alchemists into the darkness, and came out with a sort of positivist Newtonian view of the world. And any academic who mentioned alchemy was sort of laughed at. But interestingly, in academic circles now, it's a very lively corner of scientific history. And I think what it reveals again is the way that we can look at the Earth, not as from a scientific point of view, as the elements being functional and having a chemical capacity, but also not necessarily growing one into the other, but having processes that have parallels in the natural world. And the alchemists, the best of the alchemists, were worked away. And then I've seen as the fathers of the scientific tradition using the materials of the earth to try and understand that thing, just as the noble pursuit of understanding. And I felt, coming out of several years of research, that the alchemists were the real heroes. They looked on the earth as something to explore, and that one of our noble duties is to understand the universe, just to understand what's happening, just to understand these processes. And I think that, coupled with technology, is the direction for us all. And alchemy is something which isn't a sort of fringe pursuit of the Middle Ages. It's actually a kind of rather wonderful expression of reverence for the world and the processes that form it and constantly form it and are constantly going on. So yes, alchemy is the subplot of this story.
Hi, thank you for that talk. You mentioned earlier about DRC, and I think you were maybe alluding to the issues of exploitation in coltan mining there. And I just wanted to ask why do you think that human rights abuses seem to follow so frequently in the wake of mining and extraction? I'm just wondering, why do you think that continues to crop up historically and in the present day?
That's an interesting question. Is the sort of parallels between mining and human rights, and we've touched upon it a bit, but I think it's a really interesting question. And I was just thinking about, almost for the first time, the idea that actually sacred places have geological yields to them, and that's where the clash happens. Just as an aside, I did a book a couple of books ago about sacred landscape and about what landscape means to us, and it was a revelation to me, the idea that actually certain places in the earth have this capacity to generate myth and story and significance. And I think we can look at it as a Tirtha tradition in Tirtha, sacred places in India, all over the world, in every culture. There's the idea that particular, often hills or caves have a significance. And I think what's interesting, and it's almost like a kind of mystical coincidence, that actually these places very often are where minerals occur, and they have literally a sort of magnetic pull to them. And I think that's an idea which I didn't explore fully, but it very much chimes with what I was doing, and I think it's a great sort of progression from what we were doing.
Hi, it's a quick question on lab-grown diamonds. This has been the current rage, right? Now we're talking about all the ills of the mining industry and how there's a conflict with perhaps even religion and whatever, right? And human rights and so on. Now, would that be, there seems to be a very big rage because it's not only cost effective, these lab-grown diamonds, they can replace diamonds, and I think it's already happening. Lots of stores are selling diamonds. Could that be a way for the future, perhaps for other things, because it can eliminate mining if it is successful, right? Perhaps for other minerals and metals, could that work? Because that seems like magic almost, because the diamonds took millions of years to form, and now they're saying you can do it in weeks. Your take would be very interesting.
Diamonds, I mean, I didn't touch on diamonds, but they have that same pattern, don't they? I mean, blood diamonds, as you said, in West Africa, they're associated with crime, corruption, with illegal trade, with horrific extraction processes, and yet they're a wonderful thing. We wear them, and also, as you say, they can be manufactured artificially. There's a chapter in the book. There's a wonderful. It's not a diamond, but it's a sort of jewel called moldavite, which is an extraordinarily rare green crystal that's found only. It's a splash-formed tektite, which is formed by meteorites hitting the earth and the silicon in the earth. It's thrown up and forms these sort of tear-like drops, which then drop to the earth. And only in one place in the Czech Republic are they a particular translucent green. And they have now become, I think they were during lockdown, they were a TikTok sensation as they became sort of known for their magic powers, and everyone was after moldavites. And they're very easy to imitate. They're just like bottle, you can make them. But the true moldavites, when you go there to these villages, there is a very shady extraction process going on. So again, you have at one end, people enjoying crystals for their medicinal power or their beauty or whatever it is. At the other end, you have this landscape that was covered in pits, and villagers who in the night would go in and try and extract them. The police were coming in other ways. So it was the same sort of mythology, if you like, of our desires, our greed, and at the other end, these beautiful things which brought out the sort of worst of our criminal instincts, if you like. So yes, diamonds are another example of that. Yeah.
Hello, Purdy Fraser. I wondered whether I could take you back to other books that you've written, specifically Russia. And I'm wondering, I know you went there 30-something years ago. Do you have any reflections now? Have you been back recently to any of the places you visited, and what your reflections are?
Thank you. Yes, actually, that's neat because I spent a lot of time in the 90s in the sort of fringes of the Soviet Union, and as it was all coming up, breaking up and becoming open again, I did a lot of traveling then. And I hadn't been back for years. And then for this book, I went back to Georgia, and I hadn't been there for 20 years or so. And it did set me, personally reflecting on what I'd been looking for then. And I was very interested in particularly I was then writing a book about the Armenians and the sort of the culture of the Armenians in the Caucasus and all over the Middle East and in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And I spent time in those mountains, and they changed. There was a sort of a sadness about it. They're very prosperous, those peripheral places in the Soviet Union, and since the collapse, they've become marginalized. And in the last village I went to, panning for gold, right up in the Caucasus, the village was semi-abandoned, these large Soviet houses, beautiful sort of vine-clad wooden houses, prosperous, were sort of ruined. And the man I spent time with, the gold panner, lived in one room of this house, still panning, going out each day when he could, panning for gold. So that was, personally, thank you for that. It brought that sort of full circle and allowed me to reflect on what the different things I was looking for. I was looking at that time for sort of history and culture and peoples, and this time for minerals. And it brought me back to the same place. So thank you.